All right. Perfect. Okay. So I am Jodi. I'm an SLP at Newmarket. I was previously at Sandusky. We're currently working that out. So I will be talking about implementing AAC today. And this is important for everyone in our field that's working with the kids to know how to do this. So if at any point you have questions, feel free to save them for the end, because I do have a list of questions that were sent my way, and I did try to do my best to answer those. So I'll try to do that throughout the session, and then some that aren't as applicable during the session, I will save for the end. So if they aren't answered by the end, feel free to ask it at the end. But if you would like to make a comment or answer anything I'm asking within the presentation, definitely feel free to do that in the chat. All right, so first of all, I just want to say you guys are amazing. Everyone that works with our kids is amazing. And especially in the position of BTs, knowing that you are interacting with our kids on a daily basis, and all of the work that we do for our kids, it does not go unrecognized. And we as SLPs are heavily reliant on everyone who works with our kids to be implementing the strategies that we're using with them. So starting it off on a positive note, just remember that. Okay, so just to start off, we have a definition of AAC. So I have two definitions to provide for you. The first one's from the International Society of Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So AAC is a set of tools or strategies that an individual uses to solve everyday communication challenges. So the mode of the communication that they choose is secondary, as long as the intent and meaning are understood by their communication partners. So this might be in the form of speech, text, gestures, body language, sign language, touch, symbols, pictures. We have speech generating devices. But remember, everyone every day uses multiple forms of communication depending on the context and our partners. Okay, and from the American Speech Language Hearing Association, we have another definition. Essentially, they're stating that it's the essence of human life and that all people have the right to communicate to the fullest extent possible. And no individual should be denied this right, irrespective of the type and or severity of the communication, linguistic, social, cognitive, motor, sensory, perceptual, and or other disabilities that they may present. Okay, so that's just something to remember as moving forward, all the different methods that we do have. So here are some common terms that you might see, whether you're reading some literature, looking at a student's IEP, talking to us SLPs, or anyone that's involved in the child's communication, goals, planning, whatever the case may be. So our first one is the picture exchange communication system. You may have seen this before, and it's essentially what it is called. They use picture exchanging to communicate. So instead of using a device, they're actually manipulatives that they can pick up pictures and exchange for whatever the action item may be. And then we have speech generating device, and this is also referred to as a voiced output communication aid or a voice output communication device. I've seen that in IEPs too. And that is what we're probably the most popular that we're used to seeing. A lot of our kiddos do have that. So LAMP is language acquisition through motor planning. So this is a particular vocabulary system that we might have on our devices. In our setting, we do have a lot of kiddos who do use this system, in addition to a few others, but this is probably the most popular. And another term is aided language stimulation. So I'll talk about this more coming soon in the presentation. But just know that that is the acronym. And last but not least, we have pragmatic organization dynamic display, which is, it's like a book where you're pointing through the pictures as you go along. This isn't as common, at least I don't see it as much in our setting, but kids do still use it, and it is very beneficial for communication. Okay, so now we're going to talk about unaided versus aided AAC. So unaided AAC is a tool that does not require a physical aider tool. So this is what we could use simply just by having ourselves. So we have our facial expressions, body language, gestures, and sign language. Aided AAC are the tools that we use, tools or materials that we use to communicate. So this could be symbol boards, choice cards, communication books, like I showed you earlier, the PODD books, keyboards and alphabet charts, speech generating devices, communication devices, AAC apps, or mobile devices. I have a few clients who do have apps on their devices that they use for more supplemental communication, and it is very helpful. Okay, so when we are evaluating a student for a communication device, or really any AAC in general, we're looking at certain skills. So when we conduct our assessments as SLPs, we are looking at these skills in particular. So that would be joint attention. So how well are they attending to things in their environment? Are they able to focus on one thing, look back at it, or gain your attention to look at the same item? Are they able to follow your gaze or your point? Are they able to scan and select? So if you present a few pictures in front of them, are they able to look back and forth between them and choose the one they want? Or are they just putting their hand down and selecting one? Are they able to visually discriminate things? So if you have two different pictures, are they able to tell the differences between the two? Are they initiating communication? Are they able to select? So this is something we do when we, if you ever see us conducting assessments on multiple devices, we're looking at how well they can select based on the size of the device, the size of the buttons, the display on the screen, as well as their motor and visual skills too. So this is only necessarily for devices, like I said before. We're looking at all forms of communication. And then access skills and delayed access to reinforcement, which all of you should be experts at. Okay, and all systems require motivation. That is something I am going to bring up a lot in this presentation, because in order to communicate, we have to be motivated, and especially with device users, this is very new for them. So getting them to buy into the device and its use requires motivation at all times. Okay. So here's some background information on the levels of communication. So there are 3 levels I'm going to talk about today. So we have level 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to talk about emerging communicators as level 1. Level 2 is beginning symbolic communicators, and level 3, intermediate symbolic communicators. So emerging communicators are those that are using pre-symbolic communication, which would include reflexive or reactive behavior. And this extends through individuals who exhibit more intentional or goal-directed behavior. And then finally, onto those who exhibit intentional communicative behavior, directing the behavior towards gestures or natural non-symbolic means. Okay, and then with our beginning symbolic communicators, so they might be using some symbols. So this could be manual signs or approximations, vocalizations, stylized gestures, verbalizations, verbal approximations. So we wrote in here 1 through 50. So this is that beginning to use that symbolic communication is this stage. So they may have started combining them together, if not much at all. And they might use picture or object-based communication strategies, or a single or double message speech generating device to indicate a greeting, reinstatement, requesting preferred activities, or making choices. And last, we have our intermediate symbolic communicators. So these communicators are ready to learn. So this is the stage where we can use a number of symbols. So manual signs, approximations, vocalizations, verbalizations, they can use them one at a time, or they may be combining the symbols. Or at least in a word order, including multiple words. So in this case, I want, I like, I don't like, I go. So it's still simple, but they're ready to learn. Okay, so you guys could participate in the chat or turn your microphones off for this, or sorry, mute off for this. So let's just think about this. So why shouldn't we expect an early complex communicator, so think level 2, to produce words such as please or expanded utterances such as I want or more, and adding to that?
There are words that can be easily confuse others.
Yeah.
So like more can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, so they just don't have the background yet. So the word please, for example, they're still learning the function of requesting. Sorry, we have some chats. Let me see. Yes, so they're still building those skills, and they don't have those yet. So why would we be teaching more of a manner when they're still working on basic functional communication skills? And same with I want. They don't yet have that skill to add to. And same with sorry, I can't hear that. Am I breaking up to you guys, or is that someone else?
It sounded like someone else, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you were saying. Whoever that was, if you'd like to type it into the chat instead, if you know that it's you. I can't hear that. Am I breaking up to okay, just a second. Let me troubleshoot here. Okay, Amanda, will you respond? Can you hear me okay? Just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Some people were saying, Jodi, though, maybe we should just use the chat instead for questions and stuff.
Okay, perfect. That is fine. So I can't see it very well, but I'll try to pull it up as I'm presenting because I have it in full screen. So Amanda, if you don't mind, if you see a question, will you stop me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let me look at some of the responses from that. Okay, yes, they're still not making approximations and may not be combining symbols or sentences. So yes, if they don't have the skill to request the item yet, if they only are using, so when we teach, when we're starting to introduce the device, we might be using nouns first just to get their buy-in. And then once we do start using more core vocabulary, which I'll get to later, that's when we can start expanding our sentences. But if they're not even producing, if they only have those 50 symbols, then we cannot yet work on expanding that. And also we need to think of the function of communication. So please would just not be relevant at that time yet. But with this being said, we can still model. So it's not bad for us to do it. If we, if they say something like, for example, they want the swings. So they tell me swing. I'm going to then say verbally, oh, you want swing, and then I can model it on a device. I want swing. So it's really important that we still expose them to that language. So this is another thing to think about. So in typical language development, when we are verbal and hearing, at a young age, we're being introduced to so much language. So when we're 3 months old, we can't talk yet, but people are still communicating with us and saying everything out loud. They're modeling all the time. And we need to remember that when we're working with our device users or AAC users. Okay, so a typical speaker will communicate at a rate about 160 to 220 words per minute, but a typical AAC user may communicate at a rate of up to about 30 words per minute. So that is a huge difference. So while we're working with these kiddos and device users, we need to think about our practice. Are we giving them enough time? Because if we're not, we need to make sure we are waiting. Sometimes waiting is the best way to respond. So I get a lot of questions about multimodal communicators in my session. So a lot of the students I have who use AAC use a device in addition to speech. And then it becomes really confusing when you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I respond, and what mode am I modeling, and what mode am I reinforcing? And that's when we can really take a look at how they're responding, and we really just need to follow them during this time. So if they're nonverbal or limited verbal and use AAC, they're considered multimodal communicators. So this means they have multiple ways to communicate their messages. So as well as AAC, so I want you to pay attention to the things I'm going to say. They can use vocalizations, word approximations, some words, gestures, and sign language. So whenever we're working with our users, if they choose to, vocalize instead of using their device, we need to acknowledge that. We're not going to force them to use the device if they respond using a word approximation or by using a sign, because ultimately that was a communication attempt and we need to acknowledge it. So we need to just value and respect what they are communicating, and whatever they are communicating tells us something. And some people might wonder, so I have this in here too, why someone might have a device if they can say some words. So even though they can communicate using spoken language, AAC can help with language. So it can give them more words and access to that language. And they can communicate far more with the AAC than they can with speech alone. Okay, do I have any questions after that about multimodal communication? No? Okay. So these are all of the different types of communication again, just to reiterate. So again, we're going to respect exactly what they choose and respond to how they choose to respond to us. So this is very valuable when we're modeling and teaching. Okay, so knowing all of the methods of communication, we need to think about why we're communicating. So we can request, protest, comment, and direct, ask questions, share information, comment, and initiate. So we are going to work on encouraging communication when we're starting out and whenever we're working with our device users or any student in general. And this is great to follow the preference assessments that we just talked about. So once you know what they like and dislike, we can encourage them by presenting items to request activities or reinstatement, refuse an activity, choose between items, or comment on the activity. So when items are accessible, and this is something that I want everyone to think of as you're working with a child and you're working on requesting, we need to think of how natural it is. So if something is in the immediate environment and within their reach, does it make sense to request that if they can just grab it? So if you have a pen sitting at your desk, do you need to ask for it? No, you don't. So we need to make sure that when we're setting up for a child to request an item, it's naturalistic. So there are many ways we can do this. So having it out of sight, out of reach, or being withheld. And here are some things we can do. So you might do these things naturally without thinking about it, but it does help if there's an actual term to define it. So you could take a second and look at those and see if you do use these in your sessions. And I'm curious to know, once you take a look at these, you guys could write in the chat which ones you tend to use frequently, or which ones do you prefer when you're working with a student to request items. Time delay. Yeah. Yes, I'm a huge fan of wrong item and missing item. I love acting and pretending with my kids. And it's really fun to do this while we're playing too. So an example of this, so I can think of a puzzle activity. So if a child chooses a puzzle, I might just give them the base of the puzzle without the pieces. And then I'll pretend that I just forgot it. So I'm giving them an opportunity to request more or tell me that I'm missing something, or tell me that they need something. I could also, that could also be an incomplete presentation. This could also work really within any activity that you do in the classroom. Say if you have a task bin, not giving them all of the contents of the box. Or if you're working in OT, you forget to give them the scissors or their pencil. That's a great opportunity just to have them engage a little bit more and really taking advantage of every communication opportunity that you have. I won't go through all of these because I think you can make sense of it all, but it is here for reference if you would like to look through it. Okay, so we all have a role in supporting AAC. And with that being said, here are some general skills we need to work on as we support and interact with AAC users. So it's important that we learn to model, wait, prompt, listen, and respond. So those are just a few things that we really need to be cognizant of as we're working through our sessions with our kids. And as users, here are some things that they will really value in us as communication partners. We need to be providing opportunities for AACUs to encourage successful communication. So this means that the children have their devices, or like I said, whichever AAC methods they have alongside them at all times. So it's not going throughout your day and then once it's a time to request, you hand them the device. It's encouraging them to bring their device everywhere and throughout every opportunity within the day. So you're going to engage and interact, provide real and motivating reasons to communicate. So you're going to be flexible. So what happens if their device dies? What happens if you don't have the charger? What happens if the device malfunctions? What happens if they didn't bring their textbook? We need to be ready to adapt and use what we have in our environment to help them communicate. So in that case, if you notice that something is missing from the child's device or other methods, ask the SLP. So we have lots of resources, SLPs, to provide you with. And if they have a communication system, we can provide you with something temporary or try to problem solve or troubleshoot to resolve that so they have that as quickly as possible. Okay, we're going to be consistent. We need to use the communication system regularly, like I said before. And this is a huge one. Be patient and allow for time for communication to happen. Don't use time as a reason to pass up an opportunity. So we know that learning AAC, it's going to take a bit for them to learn each hit, each word, and they need time to process, to respond to every model or every level of prompting. And we can't pass that up because every time you're in this opportunity, you want to really take advantage of it. And we're going to provide a balanced system. We can communicate for a variety of reasons using core words, fringe words, and the alphabet. So that's going to the keyboard if they need a number. They can use their core words. We'll talk about those more later, but those are those high frequency words. Fringe vocabulary, so vocabulary that's very specific to the child. We need to make sure we're using all of it. And if the child can't use all of it yet, we need to be modeling it, whether it's on the device or out loud. Okay. And next is aided language stimulation. So this is something I am a huge fan of. So it's a communication strategy. Sorry, just a minute. Where the communication partner teaches the meaning of symbols and models language by combining their own speech with the selection on the AAC system. So I have a quick video for you guys to watch. Let me stop sharing so I can share my sound. I love this video, and I just want you to pay close attention to what the parent is modeling and what she's producing afterwards. So if you notice, he's talking about what they're doing and he's expanding on what they're doing, and she's following by just saying one word, and that is totally fine. So in this case, they're just going about their routine, just talking about what's going on in the environment, and they're just having fun using the device. And notice that this is across users too. So it's not only for Jodi to use, it's for everyone and the family to participate in. So this is something we can all do as a team. Okay, so that's just a cute video for everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. Beth was just saying that's one of her videos to teach parents too. And I thought you guys would appreciate this cool meme. So here's another chart just to kind of explain that a little bit more. So with a typically developing verbal child, we might model in spoken language and they're just fine producing their own spoken language. With aided language development, we really have to look at that mismatch. So how do we expect them to use their device to communicate when we're not the ones modeling on it? They need to see how that language looks, and the only way they're going to get that is if we help. So that's why we would call that aided language stimulation. So at the bottom, we're all happy because we did our part to help them learn their language. Okay, and more on the do's and don'ts of modeling. Well, actually, before I get to that, I wanted to share something with you guys that I actually learned in grad school. Yeah, of course, Alyssa and Misty. So let me share. It is an acronym that I like to think about when I am working on partner augmented input. And I think it will be really beneficial for everyone to just take a look at this and think about it. So the acronym is SMORES. Okay. So as we're working with students on their devices and we're modeling and using partner augmented input, which is basically just using the device with the child, communicating about what's going on around you, adding to their language, all on the device. So here are some things we can do. We can have a slow rate. So while we're talking, and I mean talking too, not just on the device. So talk about things slowly, comment on what's going on in the environment, really taking your time to really use that language at a level that they can understand. And we're clearly articulating that. Next is modeling. So we're going to model all the time. So we can use parallel talk, talking about what the child's doing. We can use self-talk, talking about what we're doing. So really this can be done at any time. And when I say that, I really mean any time. So whether you're walking in the hallway, you're, getting ready for lunch, you're getting ready to go home, like within transitions, within sessions, within school, we can model. Okay, R is respect and reflect. So this is another point I really like to touch on in my sessions when I'm talking to BTs. So if a child produces something on their device, or if they point to something, if they gesture, they say something out loud, we need to acknowledge that. And after acknowledging that, identify what it is that they were going for. Did they want something? Did they like something? Did they need something? So say a child grabs the bubbles, or they pointed to the bubbles. Oh, you want the bubbles. So on the device, we could write want bubbles while we say it out loud. You want bubbles. Here you go, take the bubbles. But again, we're not going to expect them to copy that on the device. We're just simply encouraging them, you know, providing that verbal reinforcement for telling us, showing us what they wanted. Our second R is repeat. So we might do this naturally. So if a child, you know, they tell us they want the bubbles, I'm going to keep repeating that. You want the bubbles. Thank you for telling me that you wanted the bubbles. And we can never repeat too much because all of this language, remember, is new to them. They need to hear it. The more they hear it, the better it is. E is expand. So that's kind of like I said already, when we were respecting and reflecting, we expanded following that. So expand their utterance by 1 or 2 words. Say it verbally and on their device. Be a great model. Ellie, this is one of my favorites. I'll carry this with me forever. And last but not least, we're going to stop. So after we provide that language, just stop. See how they respond. Allow them time to respond. And sometimes they might even have more to say. If you just give them a second, look at what they're doing, look at how they're reacting. And even then you can use how they're reacting to model more language. But again, we have to stop first before we do that. Sorry guys, I like to talk with my hands. So if you're looking at my video, I know it doesn't do anything on Zoom, but I'm still doing it. Okay. Back to our PowerPoint. So now I can get into modeling. So that was the part of the SMORES acronym. So when we're modeling, there are things we should do and things that we should really avoid. So we're going to model regularly and consistently. Model across contexts and environments. And some of these points I'm really just trying to drive home, so might seem repetitive, but just still in your brain. Model a wide range of communication functions. So back to the previous slide, when we explained all of the things we can communicate, requesting, protesting, recurrence, whatever the case may be, model it. If you find an opportunity, model it. We're going to use a slow pace, self-talk, parallel talk, talking about what the child's doing, talking about what you're doing. And something else for this too, so while you're using self-talk and parallel talk, if the child gives you a hard time about using their device, be cognizant of that because we always do want their approval before touching their device. So if that means just, you know, sitting in front of the AAC user or to the side of them, but keeping their device in front of them, they're the most important. So if it's within their view, you know, stepping back from the side and touching the buttons, or if you need a secondary resource, you can use an iPad with LAMP if LAMP is the system that they have. We could provide you with a core board and other strategies too. I know when we're participating in our teletherapy sessions, I like to screen share with New Voice, and I know SnapCore has one that you could use as well, that we download onto our computers to model. And that's what I was just talking about. So like I said, don't model only once, just continue to model it. Zach, you've done an amazing job of this in our sessions. And we've been working with our friend. And I'm sure everyone, just as you're working with the child in an activity, don't say the word only once. Say, we're going to do this, we're going to make this, we're going to use our colors, we're going to use our descriptors. We're going to use all of that language over and over again. And that's the thing about core. So it's so high frequency, that's why it's so important. The more we model it, the better it is. Okay, do not take the device out of the student's view when you're modeling. So I notice sometimes that if we're really focused on it, we're not really thinking about it. So you're trying to find a word and you're using Word Finder, but you're just so into finding the word that you're kind of forgetting what the purpose of you finding the word is. Your purpose is to model. So when we're even using Word Finder, have it in front of the student and go through that with the student. Don't take the device away get to the button and then present it back to the student because they didn't see any of that. Or if you do need to, keep it close to yourself, then make sure you do that sequence over again with the student, with the device facing them. Okay, and we're not going to stop modeling if the user doesn't respond. Because again, they're hearing it, they're in the environment, they're seeing it. We don't need them to reply to know that they're being exposed to it. And again, we're not going to expect them to copy every word that we model, just like the video showed. Okay, so now if anyone is wondering about prompting, we are going to talk about that next. So I have this prompting hierarchy right here, which goes through the steps. And I'm going to just cover this quickly because we are running out of time. But these are the steps we typically use. So we're modeling all of the time using aided language stimulation. So if we're in a more structured task, depending on the task, we might use least to most or most to least. Let me show you what that would look like. So if we're using most to least, so starting with a model, that might be when they're learning a new skill. Say we're learning to label verbs on the device. They have no idea where that's at yet, so they need our model first. Then we could start fading that back to just the cue to the first hit, and then fading it back even more to increase their independence. So when we use most to least, we don't want to do that for too long. So we want to try advancing to least to most once we see they're receptive to it. And even if it's inconsistent, it's emerging at that point. So that's when we could start falling back from the top to the bottom for least to most. Okay, so here's what it looks like. So first we're going to pause after creating motivation and whatnot, as we typically do. We're going to pause. So just get their attention by pausing, creating that expectant pause. Next, we're going to use an indirect cue. So getting their attention on the device in general, their eyes towards the device. After that, we can provide a direct visual cue, so to the button directly. And if not, they're still not responding, we could provide an unfinished sentence or a phonemic cue. So say we're talking about ball. So they already went to the ball button on the device. We're holding our finger there. It's a, and then point to the ball again. And then finally, we'll provide the model if they're not responding. But again, depending on the task, we will not expect them to copy us. If it is a more structured task, depending on the clinician, you could always ask what their expectations are. Okay, and someone asked a question earlier, should we provide physical assistance? You really need to be careful with this one, just because communication should always be a choice. So there are a few instances where we can use partial physical or full physical prompts, but we prefer hand under hand. So partial physical is when you would just give them a light tap on the arm to use the device. So get their attention back to what they're supposed to be doing. So just a light tap on the arm to use the device. And if we need to use hand over hand, we're going to, well, hand over hand, we're going to use hand under hand. So that way they're in charge. And then they can see what's going on the screen too, because it's a lot when there are lots of hands over the device. But again, this is mostly only if they have visual or motor deficits, and if they're going to select and you see that they keep selecting the wrong one, then we need to help them out. But we're not going to do this if we're trying to get them to respond. So if they're not responding, we need to increase motivation. We're not going to use hand under hand. Okay. So we're running out of time, but I will just talk about LAMP really quick. So we should all be familiar with LAMP. So it's language acquisition through motor planning. So it's a therapeutic approach based on neurological and motor learning principles. So essentially when we're using LAMP, the pages don't change. So it's the same pattern every time. So we memorize it motorically as we go through it. And there's just research behind it for students who are nonverbal and have limited verbal abilities to spontaneously express themselves. Okay. So I have these slides shared if you guys would like to walk through this yourselves if you need a reminder. This is just how to use Word Finder, and it takes you through all the hits. So there's 3 hits. I'm going to search for the word we want. It shows us how to get there. Okay, and then there's different levels of LAMP words for life. So we have 1 hit. So they simply hit the button and it provides us with the word. Transition might be 2 hits. And then the full board, we have everything available to us. And then as speech language pathologists, we primarily teach, well, things that we begin to teach right when they get the device is their personal information, which is under My on the device. And then we'll chat about fringe vocabulary and core vocabulary. Sorry, I didn't see the chat. Yeah, it does cost a lot, but we have to remember how important it really is for our kids. Okay, so core versus fringe. So if you heard me saying before, core is the vocabulary that makes up most of what we say every day. So 75 to 80%. So these are those verbs that we use, prepositions, pronouns, descriptors. So we can use these in so many communication opportunities. They're not specific. We can use them to describe. But because of that, they're very abstract sometimes, and they're hard to learn. So the more we use them, the better it is for the student. And fringe vocabulary is that more specific vocabulary. So personal vocabulary, preferred items, things that relate to home or school, very specific items. Okay, and I do have some examples in here. Lynn uploaded this updated presentation. So if you need more ideas of what core vocabulary could look like when you're working with a student other than want, this would be a great resource, as well as providing other communication opportunities other than the requesting. So these will be the meat of what we're modeling. So we can use this and then add a word. So just think of it that way. You can use core vocabulary and then add on to it. It's fine to use fringe vocabulary as long as we're using this to model language. And like I said, it's all about balance. Okay, and here are just some resources for you guys for activities using LAMP, if you're interested at all when you're working with your kids. And then some research you can read about. Okay, and I did want to cover one more thing. Sorry, Ellen, I'm running over a little bit, but I had a few people ask this question about stimming on a device. And there are many ways to approach this. So it really depends on when they're stimming. And a good behaviorist will be able to tell you, or I'm sure a lot of you can pick up on that yourselves, what the function of that is. Are they bored? Are they overwhelmed? Are they trying to get attention? What's the function of them stimming on the device? So if it does appear to be more behavioral, how would you normally respond to that? Would you try to get their attention back to the task? Would you count down, then represent the material? Think of it that way. But it is important to remember that if they're repeating a lot, so if someone said, like they're saying, I want candy, candy, they're learning the device, they're learning language. And you have to think, so I have an 18-month-old niece. She just learned the word brush or toothbrush. And I was in a Zoom call with her. She probably used the word toothbrush 30 times. So think of it that way. When we learn something new, we want to use it. We want to use it. So in that case, we let them use it. They're playing with it. They're trying to learn how to use it. So that's fine. But like I said, it really depends on the function. Turning the device off, turning the volume down, we're not going to do that. Think of something else you can do. Increase the motivation. Provide a different activity to see if they'll respond to that. Use the device to model something functionally. And then there's another option too. So if they really seem to love, using the device for non-functional language. And they're just hitting the same button over again. Like I had a client who loved hitting is, and he would laugh when he hit it. Like he just loved hearing it. He loved the way it sounded when the device repeated over and over again. And he liked playing with the words. Like he just liked going to food and looking at all the different foods. And that's totally fine. But if it does seem to be distracting, you can make a designated talk time. So this is just a strategy you can use. So if you're working with a child all day and they love to look at the device and play with the words, give them a designated time for that. 5 minutes at the end or 5 minutes at the start. Those are all just ideas to respond to the stimming or any repetitions that you might be seeing. And does anyone have any last questions? I think I answered most of the questions that were in the document.
I just want to say something real quick. I'm
Yeah.
next. So if you guys have to go to the bathroom, that's fine, but I'm going to just go ahead and start when we're done. So if you're a little late, that's okay. And thank you, Jodi. That was awesome.
Okay. Sorry for running over, Ellie.
Oh,
Make
no,
sure
you're
I got
fine.
everyone's questions answered.
No, that was great.
All right.
All right. See you guys.
All right. And if you guys have any other questions, feel free to email or email the SLP too that your child works with.